So hi everybody, it's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our long and growing series on happiness. And to get the ball rolling for today, Brian sent over a link to this particular video. So Brian, why don't you set the stage a little bit for everybody, and then we'll watch part of it. It's 7 minutes long in total. It is a YouTube video, and I'll chat over the link to you guys after he does his little setup. So go ahead, Brian.
The video was interesting because this guy here, Tal Ben-Shahar, wrote a book called Happier No Matter What. And he posits that happiness is something that you cultivate, but not just in good times, but in bad times as well. So he see it as a both to and from perspective. So that was an interesting thing, because that really accounts for the whole of the nervous system and how at the surface any emotion first starts on a physical level that we become aware of, and that accounts for that top down, bottom up information processing of the nervous system.
Excellent. Yeah. Now we've earlier in our discussions on happiness, we did see something else from, is it Tal Ben-Shahar? I think it's Tal Ben-Shahar.
There are only two kinds of people who do not experience.
And I think he's part of Harvard's World of Psychology, School of Psychology. So let's go ahead and listen to a few minutes of this, and then I might want to jump past a part of it because I want to get right to his model, and then we can see how he gets into that. I will tell you that what he's talking about resonates very much with Seligman's work on resilience. So let's take a quick look at part of this, and then we'll have our discussion around it. So where's my cursor? How come I can't click on play? So you guys should be able to hear this through regular audio. So here goes.
There are only two kinds of people who do not experience painful emotions. The first kind are the psychopaths. The second kind are dead. There is a false understanding or expectation that a happy life means being happy all the time. No, learning to accept and even embrace painful emotions is an important part of a happy life, and the study of painful emotions is an important part of the field of happiness studies. My name is Tal Ben-Shahar. I'm a student and teacher in the field of happiness studies, and my most recent book is Happier No Matter What. There is a very important concept that was introduced by Nassim Taleb, and that is anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is essentially resilience 2.0. Resilience 1.0 is when we put pressure on a system. After the pressure is lifted, that system goes back to its original form. Anti-fragility takes this idea a step further. You put pressure on a system, it actually grows bigger, stronger. We see anti-fragile systems all around us and within us. For example, our muscular system. We go to the gym and we lift weights. We're putting pressure on our muscles. What happens as a result? We actually grow stronger. We're an anti-fragile system. On the psychological level, you know what that's called? PTG. Post-traumatic growth. So where post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is about breaking down, post-traumatic growth is about growing stronger. As a result of pressure, stress, it's anti-fragility. The role of the science of happiness is to teach us what conditions we can put in place to increase the likelihood of growing from hardship. Now, there is a paradox when it comes to pursuing happiness. On the one hand, we know that happiness is a good thing, whether in and of itself or as a means toward other ends. At the same time, we also know from research by Iris Moss and others that people who say to themselves, happiness is important for me, I want to pursue it, those individuals actually end up being less happy. In fact, they're more likely to experience depression. So the paradox is that on the one hand, happiness is clearly a good thing. On the other hand, valuing it as a good thing is problematic. So what do we do? The way to resolve this paradox is that we pursue happiness indirectly. Think about sunlight. So if I look at the sun directly, it's going to hurt my eyes. However, if I break down sunlight into its elements, into its constituents, I can look at the colors of the rainbow. So I'm indirectly looking at the sunlight, enjoying it, savoring it. In the same way, pursuing happiness directly can cause more harm than good, but breaking it down into its elements can lead us to enjoy the indirect pursuit of happiness and by extension to raise our overall levels of happiness. What are the metaphorical colors of the rainbow when it comes to happiness? Here we have what I've come to call the SPIRE model, and it can trigger the anti-fragile system. SPIRE is an acronym that stands for spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and finally, emotional well-being. Spirituality is about finding a sense of meaning and purpose in life, at work and at home. If you wake up in the morning with a purpose, you're more likely to overcome barriers. When it comes to physical well-being, the most important idea to look at is stress, the silent killer. In the United States, more than half of the employees do not use up their vacation time. And even those that do, close to half are still tethered to their work. The problem is not the stress, it's the lack of recovery. With intellectual well-being, there's research showing that people who are curious, who ask questions, are not just happier, they also live longer. Another important element is not just asking questions, it's deeply engaging with material. It can be text, a work of art, even nature. Relational well-being is very important. The number one predictor of happiness is quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us. And it turns out the number one condition that we can put in place to increase the likelihood of anti-fragility, of growing through hardship, is the quality of our relationships. Finally, emotional well-being. So embracing painful emotions is critical, but how do we then cultivate pleasurable ones? Specifically, the emotion of gratitude. Cicero talked about gratitude as the mother of all virtues. When we appreciate the good in our life, we have more of it. So happiness is much more than pleasure. Happiness is whole being. These 5 elements together create that sunlight, happiness. I don't think there is a point before which one is unhappy, after which one is happy. Rather, happiness resides on a continuum. It's a lifelong journey. And knowing that, we can have realistic rather than unrealistic expectations about what is possible. I do not think that things necessarily happen for the best. However, we can learn to make the best of things that happen.
Get smarter faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers. To learn even more from the world.
So, what'd you guys think of that?
Yeah, so immediately when I saw it, that SPIRE model, I said, that's productive tension. And I compared his thoughts with that article on maximizing versus satisficing, because what it talks about from a neuroscience perspective for me is it really pinpoints how we have 2 sets of neurons that work together when I talk about bottom up, top down processing. So in other words, we have affective neurons, and that's the neurons that receive information from sensory organs and transmit to the central nervous system, so essentially to the brain. And then you have neurons that send impulses from the nervous system to the limbs and organs. Those are called efferent neurons. So happiness happens both ways, not just one way. So, you know, this idea that we can just do this experience and not realize that there's, you know, an intellectual component, there's an emotional component. I said that's the whole of productive tension. You know, productive tension accounts for all of it, in my opinion.
Very good. Very good. Who else? Yeah, Brian, we keep losing you a little bit, so stay on mic. I'm very curious to know about what you guys think about this idea about resilience 2.0 or anti-fragility. Thoughts about that?
No, this is Kathy. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's how do you respond to your situation is what I'm hearing there. And it goes along very much with what we know from the change grid, from this work, that we can shift and expand and strengthen. And it is about how we incorporate and respond. In terms of the Spire piece, I mean, that's the basis of most of the work that I do spiritually or with people in their growth or any coaching is to look at, have them make a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual map, you know, of where they are in their lives. So there's the relational piece that he brings into place. But so those two pieces resonate with me, but that notion makes perfect sense. So that's all I have to say about it right now.
Yep. Diane, go right ahead.
And T, I would add to that.
Yep, Tim.
I was just going to say I would add to what she just said in terms of when he talked about the resistance training, which I'm sure you related to because
Absolutely.
you actually work out. But you know, just putting the stress on the muscle to get it to grow. So that analogy was very interesting there.
Yeah, it's like if you exercise your muscles, they get bigger and stronger. You exercise your intellect, it gets bigger and stronger. Why wouldn't your resilience get bigger and stronger? Diane, what do you think? You got your hand up there.
Absolutely. I loved it. I loved it because it's thoughtful. It's not superficial. It's multidimensional. It reminded me of my business cards, which say, being positive doesn't mean you hope for the best. It means you will be the best no matter what. And so I love the idea. I mean, I'm very familiar with the resilience, but I've never heard the term PTG, post-traumatic growth. And I agree that it goes with physical and some older wisdom like that, which doesn't kill us, makes us stronger.
Exactly, Nietzsche, right?
If you process it correctly, but if you process it as, oh, woe is me, and I'm a victim, and there we go again, and they are the perpetrator, and they are mean and awful, and get angry at the situation and see yourself as the victim, then it perpetuates your sense of powerlessness. But if you see it as an opportunity for growth, what did I learn from this? The way we teach chess players, I love it, and I'm going to incorporate PTG in my therapy sessions.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I love this idea about anti-fragility. The other note that I wrote down was this idea that gratitude is something that you can actually practice and deliberately do to reframe a negative experience into more of a positive one. So rather than getting stuck and wallowing in whatever the negative event happens to be, you can instead find a way beyond that to an even, well, depending on what the situation was, a more manageable outcome.
Right. And it speaks to, for me, the conditioning, how we condition ourselves based on these emotions, and they become kind of a default mode network that we rely on, but we can expand them through this resistance.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I also jotted down a little note here that when he said that people who pursue happiness end up very unhappy, but people who, instead, if you focus on what these component elements are that contribute to the overall experience of happiness, you end up happy. So I thought that was just a very interesting thing. So maybe we shouldn't even be talking about happiness when we're talking to our clients, but instead talk about the pursuit of all those things that ultimately result in, happiness is the side effect of whatever it is you happen to be, doing or involved in. Thoughts about that, everyone?
Yeah, because they can learn along the way. That's the thing. So in other words, that article about maximizing versus satisficing. I don't know why I have tough time with that
Because
word.
it's a made up word. So satisficing, but yeah, I thought that was interesting.
But the difference is, when we talk about the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, right? Acetylcholine puts the spotlight on. So we do things very deliberately. That's what you need in terms of neuroplasticity. You need an intensity, you need focus, you need a certain alertness, and that grows in your sleep. It doesn't grow while you're doing it. So if you just do things like, for most people, like we talked about before, gratitude, for me, the journal isn't about just writing something down like a to-do list. No, it's a practice where I
Right,
get to check myself.
right.
So that becomes very deliberate, and then I can reflect on it and see, what did I gain? What did I not gain? That kind of thing. So that makes it very deliberate, to where you're learning along the way. So this cultivation has to be quite deliberate. It can't be just something that you just do, check off the list, because then that becomes the chase.
Yes, yes. And so how does this affect the work that you'll do with your clients? Now that we've heard what Tal Ben-Shahar has to say about this SPIRE model and this idea about, I love this idea about anti-fragility. I love Resilience 2.0. I love this idea about post-traumatic growth. These are really simple concepts that I think are very powerful when it comes to helping someone reframe whatever their experience happens to be. But when and how do you introduce this? So let's say you're working with someone who's just lost their job, and now they're feeling, what are they going to be doing, on and on and on. So they're having some kind of trauma has just happened there. What do you do? Yeah. Now, let's see, our clinicians. Diane's obviously a clinical psychologist. Edie, you're on the call too. So what do you do if you're trying to help people get beyond whatever the trauma is? I mean, obviously people have to feel whatever they're feeling, but at what point does that feeling become problematic? And at what point does it stop becoming beneficial, or I'm going to say normal, and start to become a bit problematic? Thoughts about that?
That seems to be a major challenge for most people, is to just feel what you're feeling. It becomes a distraction for the most part, and they'll try to, the resistance itself, to me, speaks to the fact that they're trying to distract themselves from actually feeling it. So then, therefore, you're never really dealing with the real issue.
Right, you're just postponing it, delaying it, right? Let's see, Edie and Diane, you've both unmuted, so feel free.
Yeah, you know what I do? I do a lot of hypnodrama, and it's kind of a combination of psychodrama and hypnosis. And I take people through almost like a psychological exorcism, and I tell them, we're going to connect with the pain. It's going to be temporary. And I will have them visualize their old self with the depression and the negativity and the whatever unhappiness. And then I see it like a zoom lens, just leaving them, and I have them experience it. It's really I call it psychoexorcism, and they do feel it. In fact, somebody that just did it, oh my God, she thinks I'm God, and she wrote to the Better Business Bureau, and it's almost instant change. It really is. Then I have a canvas where they project themselves in the ideal, how they walk, talk, think, feel, the gratitude, whatever. and then I have them become one with the ideal. And I mean, with this gal, it was just one and done. I mean, I'll continue to coach her, but she cannot believe the change. So it's almost, I rewire on the subconscious level, and it's very effective.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Wow, I'm impressed with that, but I would be really scared to do that. So my hat is off to you for your courage and your knowledge and your skill. I'm a cognitive therapist, so my paradigm is it's not what happens, it's what you think it means. So when I'm dealing with somebody who's in grief, I just have them visualize. I used to use a metronome, but they're not around much anymore. A windshield wiper, a power shift ledger, a glass of water. The reason you realize that that glass is empty, that relationship, that loved one, that whatever it is gone, is because that glass was so full before. You probably never even thought about how wonderful and supportive and fulfilling and wonderful that person or that job or whatever it is that they're experiencing as a loss. So my idea is to shift the cognition from grief to gratitude, because if the glass didn't have water in it or orange juice, you wouldn't realize how empty it is now. And if people can shift from, I can't believe he's gone, or I can't believe I lost the job, to what wonderful experience it was, you see the effective change in their faces, and I'm perceiving a chemical change as well.
Yes, yes. Because again, we talk about the Buffalo maneuver. Diane doesn't even know that we've coined that term, but yeah, that you want to get somebody out of their limbic kind of emotional sorts of responses and back into cognition. And so you just want to separate for a moment and just say, isn't that interesting? Can you dissociate yourself long enough to observe what it is that you're thinking and feeling and doing? So Diane, we've named it after you. Do you want to clarify it?
No, I love it. I love it.
But Diane, I do bring the cognition in. It's not either or. It's just that I happen to do it in an altered state, because the subconscious is a million times more powerful. But the cognitive therapy is part of the toolbox. It's just done. I just find that people change faster and think bigger, better, and smarter when you engage the subconscious, because science is now saying it's a million times more powerful. So it's not different. It's just the pathway is altered.
To get there. I admire what you do. I really do. It takes special training and a lot of courage. I'm just thinking, this is the one that I do. It's very here and now and very powerful.
Right.
So
I was thinking, when you were talking too about, oh God, how did you say it? Some people crumble with the pressure and some people don't.
Right.
March Madness. And I just look at coaching styles. And it's interesting that some players, they just get fired up with a coach that's like Bobby Knight, that's screaming, yelling, hitting them, everything. And they hit each other a lot. You see that in football. And then others just break. They're like glass and they shatter with that type of coach, where they need the support from coming, below and building them up. And so there is that perceptual change and reframing the problem, which,
I think you're right, because we always have to be sensitive to what style is going to work best with a particular client. So for example, I work out with a personal trainer. So one of the very first things that he asked me is, what style of training do I respond best to? And I thought that was very nice, because I've gone through a lot of trainers and had to fire them. I don't respond well to being yelled at. So I'm trying to move a heavy amount of weight. I want a quiet encouragement, not someone yelling at me and call it, because for whatever reason, I find it so, what's my word? Overwhelming. It seems to be the word I'm using a lot these days. that it completely throws me off my whole game. So I think similarly, we have to think about, is this particular client going to respond best to a gentle kind of an approach? Are they going to respond more to someone being very direct with them? You know, so it's different people respond to different things. So we have to be flexible enough to kind of morph into whatever modality is best suited for that particular client at that particular point in time.
And don't you think a lot of it goes back to maybe, you know, what you've been exposed to in terms of parenting styles? And, you know, I've had clients that have, you know, gotten PhDs and super excelled because of anger. You know, I'm going to show them. My dad said I was never going to amount to something. And I've got one that said, my dad said that to my brother. He ended up in the prison, just like dad said, you're going to live there someday.
Yep.
But the other, out of anger and spite, said, damn you, you know
Yeah.
what?
Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with maybe some basic, I want to say personality type, but the more I talk about personality, the more I come to believe that every individual has kind of like an inherent bowl of neurochemical soup. And that bowl of neurochemical soup ends up manifesting itself in what we ultimately call personality. So I don't know that that's the case, but that's where my head seems to be wandering these days. To me, if I was more of a driver personality type, well, that father's words were throwing down the gauntlet, them's fighting words. And I'm going to prove him wrong because that's what the driver mindset does. You know, I'll succeed or I'll die trying, you know, where someone else who's more of an amiable kind of thing would be very much crippled by that kind of feedback from someone that they tend to look up to or feel as though they should be looking up to. So I'm very curious for, you know, our clinical people, and Brian, you seem to know the brain chemistry. So why would some people respond in a way that is crippling to their forward movement, and other people view it as you know, the ultimate test to prove themselves? Thoughts about
Yeah,
that?
I think what you just described is spot on, because some of it becomes conditioning and some of it is a matter of that default mode network. So in other words, this is how they're wired. Now again, the wire isn't determinism or finality. It just means you have a default system that you'll always fall back on. Because remember, the first order of business for the nervous system is all about preserving and conserving energy. So that means that you're actually designed for the status quo, right? So things that become, you know, that are novel, that you want to experience, you know, innovation and kind of change is always going to be met with anxiety, worry, doubt, fear. The key is, how do I work with that? That's where the anti-fragility and those kinds of things come in that, you know, we're just not used to because no one really trains on it. Like, that's what I'm interested in, is like the PowerPoint maneuvers.
Yeah,
right?
how to
Like, how
get
do
to
we
the center.
right? Because it seems like think about the workplace, the dilemma today. You have someone to go back to the office, some don't. You have the millennials that are driving this anti-work movement. Like, that's a serious thing on Facebook, is what the young people are telling me, where they have literally 10 million people signed on to it. So their perspective is, forget the 9 to 5. I can go be an influencer on YouTube. It's much easier. So that's the antithesis of anti-fragility, right? Because now you're trying to take the escape route, but what did you learn in the process?
Yeah, and you haven't grown. You've not really,
Right.
yeah, taken care of the underlying issue. Since we're talking about resilience, let's just do a little bit of a reminder about where resilience lives on the change grid. So obviously, I'll just go to the danger zones. If I'm in any of the danger zones, do any of you believe that resilience exists there, or is that the opposite of resilience? So again, upgrade danger zone, someone is in an actual physical threatening situation. They perceive their challenge as being an impossibility, and their perceived ability is negligent at best. So they're up there in that flight response. If they could get away from it, they would. And the outgrid danger zone believes that they've got an equally impossibly challenging situation, but they view their ability as being that of a superhero. And so they're likely to fight. I don't know that those are necessarily evidence of any sort of resilience as much as it's just the basic responses to a true threat. And then also we have the other two F's, so freeze and fade. And so Ingrid is going to fade. They're going to disappear into the shadows as much as they can. And the person who's in the downgrade danger zone is going to become immobile. They're going to freeze as their way of coping. Remember that the 4 danger zones are all physically adjacent to one another. If we put the change grid into its 3-dimensional format, these are actually all direct neighbors of one another. And so someone who's in that kind of a crisis situation can very quickly move from fighting to fleeing to freezing to fading and back around the other way and whatever random order they want to go in, because all 4 of those responses are neighbors of one another and readily available to anyone who's in any one of them. So we can review that in slow motion if you guys want, but does that feel like that's what resilience means? Or no, this is a response state that happens from survival instincts, things like that going on. Now, if I instead go, well, let's just look at the composite again. All of you should be comfortable with the composite change grid. So out here in the danger zones at the powerless point, we know that's not where resilience lives. So resilience is all about the ability to bounce back. I mean, technically, resilience is about bounce factor. It's about something being able to stretch and morph into whatever it is that's going on. Oops. So when I think about that, I go, I'm not resilient until I'm in a situation that puts my resilience to the test. I can't just walk around the planet going like, I'm a very resilient person. No, something happened, and the way that I dealt with it was demonstrating resilience. And because perhaps I've had a history of dealing with situations in a resilient way, I might bounce back even faster as I encounter these kinds of challenges more and more. You know, I learn from it, I expand my tool set. So where would that then live? Let's look at the circles. You got the red circle, the green circle, you've got the little PowerPoint in the center. So where do you think these life events are happening where our resilience becomes a factor? Where do you think?
The red.
Between the green and the red?
Between the green circle and the red circle, in just one direction or in all directions?
In all directions, I think.
In all directions, because it's a different sets of situations that might arise. So when I think about what kind of an outgrid situation might occur where resilience is being brought into play or being put to the test. So again, to be outgrid, you have that driver kind of energy. You perceive your ability as being quite strong to handle a rather high challenge. So there you are, you're being put to the test. So can you guys give me kind of an example of a situation that would describe well? Anybody? All right, going back to what we said about happiness, happiness is about accomplishing things. So one of the things we talked about was that when we can accomplish or achieve something, we may very well feel happy at the end of that. Also, if we avoid something painful, the upgrade sorts of things, we might end up feeling happy, pleased with ourselves because we are able to avoid whatever that situation happens to be.
Yep. That would be the situation like we were talking about the other day about the basketball. I mean, obstacles to achieving a goal, you know, running into an obstacle as you're working to achieve a goal. And so resilience comes into play when you are able to see it as such and find a way to keep going.
That's right. And so if I'm trying to accomplish something and suddenly I stumble across an obstacle in the road that now I have to get around, get over, or get out of the way, all right, well, something's been put now in the path I thought I was on. Maybe I was able to actually predict that there is a strong likelihood that I might encounter certain obstacles. So maybe I was able to give some thought or make some preparations in advance. But once it's put to the test and I succeed, this is an example of resilience coming into play in an outgrid situation. If that person is lacking in resilience, they're either going to move, they're going to move. What directions do you think they're likely to move if someone is in that same outgrid situation, but are not resilient enough to handle it well? What do you think? How might they cope?
They go up.
They could go upgrade because now their perceived ability has shrunk back a little bit and or the perceived challenge has increased somewhat. And now we know that someone moves further upgrade, they become more reactive. And being more reactive is not about being resilient. Where else might they move? So from
if there's no resistance, they might move downward. Like this, presume they have more ability than they actually thought, and minimize for the challenge lessons itself. Yeah, this isn't really challenging at all,
Yes, well, that's an interesting way that you've put that, because would that then encourage further movement forward, or would that hold them back? And I wanted to bring this up because I think that this is where we're talking about the difference between resilience 1.0 and resilience 2.0.
Yeah.
When I think about this outgrid resilience, I think that's strengthening the person. So what did we call that earlier? Post-traumatic growth. Yeah, I think that's going to be more likely to happen outgrid, although the traumas would not be as severe as an upgrid kind of trauma. But when I look about people who are resilient in upgrid situations and outgrid situations, that to me resonates with resilience 2.0, finding a way to grow from that particular experience. Where the other two, like the downgrid person and the ingrid person, are both more fragile. And the outgrid person in particular is more anti-fragile because they'll fight to make it happen. And I think you got a possibility of both in the upgrade situation. I'm babbling a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of throw out there that downgrid, if someone's going to be resilient, it almost has to be resilience that comes from habit, resilience that comes from routine. We've encountered this same situation before, so it doesn't feel as threatening. That to me feels like someone's going to be returned to status quo as opposed to growing further. And certainly the ingrid person is now more avoidant. So they may say, oh, I hadn't anticipated this challenge coming my way, so I'm just going to retreat. Or downgrid would be about just wherever it goes, it goes. So just accepting whatever is going to naturally come your way instead of doing something intentional and deliberate and calculating.
Right. So the downgrid, they'll be more tolerant.
Yeah, tolerant, but tolerant more as a who cares kind of thing, as opposed to tolerant as a bargaining point, saying, in order for me to move forward, I may have to accept certain things. So for example, I think people go through a grieving process when they lose a big client. But losing a big client doesn't necessarily mean that their business is over and done with, but it may mean that they need to become more tolerant of certain inconveniences in the short run in order to rebuild as a stronger organization or stronger enterprise moving forward. So tolerant, interesting. Yeah. Other thoughts around this?
The whole thing just upsets me because I see parents that, the helicopter and the lawnmower parents and stuff that clear the way. So when you talk about getting stronger because of dealing with these challenges, and parents that don't allow children the opportunity to grow, really, it's very disturbing to me. And I'm just thinking back of there was a pastor in Pennsylvania that that counseled President Clinton when the blue dress and all that came about. And he spoke at NSA, and he gave one of the best talks about all the parents want for their children is to be happy. And we are so obsessed with happiness rather than growth and developing strength and resilience. And I'm just thinking in my book, Winning, you know, where I interviewed all these people that have gone above and beyond. One of the common denominators was they all dealt with struggle. And the absence of struggle, I mean, there's no resilience then. And I'm thinking of, I don't know if you guys know this, but Richard Branson's mom, and it's been so long since I wrote it, but the mother, in this day and age, you probably couldn't do it, but she took him like 5 miles from home and said, find your way back, and would put him in challenging situations. And Richard Branson's done pretty well because he had a parent that understood the growth that comes from struggle. I just have to say that because it's upsetting to me.
Well, you're giving an example of it's been a few years, but there was a lot of talk about free range children. And giving children the opportunity to go out on their own. And yeah, I mean, you'd observe them from a distance to make sure, you know, because you're a parent, so obviously you're going to do that. But you know they're going to be better if they can learn to cope. And so one thing that concerns me very much on this whole movement about things being, you know, woke and all that sort of stuff is I certainly appreciate, honor, respect what its intention is, but there is a pendulum that's swinging, and this pendulum may very well need to swing very far to a kind of a left sort of a swing or an extreme, but it's going to come back to someplace more in the middle. And this was a big discussion that I had with some clients yesterday about growth inside of an organization within a team. And they brought up this model of thinking that, I forget whose it is, you guys can tell me more, but they said there is divergent, emergent, and convergent thinking. Do you guys, is that a reminder to any of you whose model that is? I seem to think the guy's name started with a W, but regardless. This idea about divergent thinking and how do you progress into to get through emergent into convergent kind of thinking. And so just to do this real quickly, and we can talk about this more deeply at another time, but I want to get this back to the topic at hand. Divergent thinking tends to occur in a natural place, very far up grid and very far down grid. The difference, divergent thinking just means that you are not following the status quo. You are not walking the normal path. You are either, you are accidentally finding yourself in a situation where you have to come up with something different. Or your mind is moving into something different. So that tends to resonate very much with an upgrade kind of a thing. You're in a life or death situation. You've got to come up with something that you can certainly do. The old way of thinking and behaving may not be serving you well. You'll see where that occurs a bit later. So people that are upgrade may have very much divergent thinking, but that divergent thinking is often more outwardly expressed. Where the person who's very far down grid can also be very much a divergent thinker, but it tends to be more of criticism, critical evaluation of how other people are doing things. They should have done this, or how come they're stuck in this pattern, or blah, blah, blah. And so they are divergent, but they tend not to speak about it. That tends to be quieter. Remember, the further upgrade you go, the louder things get, the more expressed things are. Downgrid, we tend to contain things a little bit more. We still are feeling it, no mistake about it, but it may not be really expressed the other way around. So basically what the theory says is that when people get pulled too much into these divergent situations, someone among them will have an emergent thought. And the emergent thought is usually, there is a better way. There is another way. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is an aha moment that I can see and feel and express. And that tends to happen more outwardly in power stress, But the person who is down in power apathy, this is where the reformer energy would come into play if you were looking at an 8-type personality model. This is the person who sees the better way and can certainly tell other people that there's a better way, but they don't have the energy themselves to actually get involved and do it. So not only do they hear the criticism of the very far down grid or experience that criticism in their own head, they're being critical in their own head, they want to come around then and tell you how you could do things better, how you can do things differently. And so they'll grumble about it, but they're unlikely to go and do anything around it, where the person who's in the upgrade emergent wants to immediately start doing things. So they're meeting the challenge, they're displaying their ability, they're displaying to the whole world that they know how to do this, a better way of doing this. So they start to become a little bit more directive about what's going on. Well, ultimately, for this to serve as a new way that people will interact with one another, a new way where people will regard and respect one another, we have to get into convergent thinking. And that's where there's an appreciation for multiple viewpoints and recognizing that very little of value is available at any extreme, but is in fact the value comes from recognizing the points of view of the extremes and then bringing it back to a place where we can find some learning, some growth, some harmony. And so convergent thinking tends to occur more outgrid in power. So from convergent, I can go upgrid or downgrid emergent, and that tends to be a way of getting us out of the upgrid or downgrid divergent sorts of thinking. So with that as my little spiel to set the stage, Tim, I'm very curious to know how you might weigh in on this one. So if you're in a place you can unmute, please do so. And tell us what your thoughts are about the pendulum swinging to an extreme and ultimately needing to find some convergence.
Well, what I find interesting in it, T, is at least from the work that I do, where we talk about diversity and trying to value differences. That's what I was thinking as I was listening to you talk through that. And how the conflict, which we've talked about on these calls before, begins to play a role in how do we make sense out of all of those different perspectives. So for me, it's always a challenge of trying to find that balance and the swinging of the pendulum when I began to consider the different viewpoints that are involved. Yeah, particularly when you're looking at group dynamics.
Yep. You know, I'm reminded of something that happened politically. Now it's a couple of years ago, and all I could think of at the time was, oh my gosh, what a lousy packaging of something. Do you remember people were talking about defunding the police?
Yeah.
And really it had nothing to do with defunding the police. It was about reallocating funds and, you know, it's trying to recreate how that kind of work is being done to expand its value and all that. But you just go, this is what happens when an emergent thinker, particularly an upgrade emergent thinker, tends to be very expressive. They don't mind stirring up whatever degree of trouble, and the movement needs that in order to draw enough attention to it. But at a certain point in time, those messages and that intensity can actually work against finding that common ground and finding that new trip up the spiral dynamic. So Tim, again, could you give us some thoughts about what happens when these ambassadors for change don't mellow a little bit over time? So,
yeah, there's a self-assessment tool that we've used when we try to get folks to think about what role do they play, really, where do they map out, if I can use that term that we're familiar with. But what it shows is really, and when I think of that tool and I look at the grid, there are those who map out to the very extreme. So they would be to the far right out in the danger zone there. And we try and coach them into recognizing where they are and what risk that creates for the culture of the organization and the experiences of others. And so, yeah, it's you just kind of got me thinking about several different things there, T. So that I'm really trying to process this and see where does it connect to the kinds of things that we talk about in this space of diversity, equity, and
Yeah, it's a really very interesting thing to look at,
yeah.
particularly when you overlay it on the change grid and see, well, what are these other layers are telling us about the dynamics? So I get it when I look at the engagement rings. People can be very much engaged. And by the way, you can be just as engaged, but downgrid. It's just quieter. So it's still there. It's all still there, and it's all still contributing. But ultimately, if we really want things to find the new normal, to find the kind of cooperation and that we're looking for, it's also asking us as a society to be resilient. And that's, to grow from that. So I always hear all these would seem like it's something different going on in the world. And it really is like, no, it's just a different way that a very common thing is being expressed. So let me give you guys one situation that's happening in Arizona. And then I'm curious to know how you know about this, particularly Tim, it's going to be about diversity and inclusion. So Arizona State University had a situation occur a few months back having to do with with the students' multicultural center. What happened was that 3 white students entered the multicultural center. One of them is Jewish, one of them is gay, and one of them is handicapped. And visibly physically handicapped. And the students that were in the multicultural center called the police on them and said that they were creating an unsafe environment, that the multicultural center was supposed to be one that is a safe space for people of other sorts of what do we say, situations, we'll just say, and kind of go from there. And these 3 students were just kind of going like, we're just because our skin is white doesn't mean that we don't deal with our own issues around discrimination and adversity and that sort of a thing. And so it put Arizona State University in a very difficult situation, because technically every student is, by their guidelines, entitled to access every facility in the Arizona State University. So Tim, what do you think about that kind of a situation?
Oh yeah, yeah, that definitely plays out, and that's the challenge of it, because the new term we talk about in that space is belonging. It seems like every so many years we add a different letter to it.
Yeah.
But trying to get to the place where the value is expanded, and unfortunately, we hear this term of being politically correct. Which in my mind simply is just a way of saying I should be able to insult you and you not get offended.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard a little bit about that, and that's difficult. But you're right. I mean, all students should have access. When we talk about creating affinity groups with organizations, one of the messages we say to folks is, well, you don't have to have membership in that group to participate in that group. Case in point, there's a veterans group in some organizations, in many organizations, and you don't have to be a vet in order to participate in the veterans affinity group in the organization. So I can see where that could get conflicting, because folks don't always see it that broadly.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting.
To that relational aspect that Tal was talking about in that SPIRE model, right? So, I talk about often this idea that I've been pitching to organizations about creating a culture of health. If 40% of people are going to work and feel that that work is stressful, and they're going to positions for stressful conditions to be treated, I think there's an imperative for organizations to understand how their environment creates stress.
Yes.
Because it does impact behavior. That's psychology 101 when you're talking about, the correlation between environment and behavior. So why not understand that from a relational aspect?
Yeah. Brian, we're losing you again on your audio there. but we got you there. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. But at a certain point in time, this is where you have to say, like, well, the responsibility is to find that convergence. But with these voices of the emergent thinkers have to be, they're the catalysts for this to happen. They're the ambassadors for it. But sooner or later, we have to figure that common ground. And there's no common ground if we're both going to stay at different extremes. Okay, that's we're at the top of the hour. I just need to let you guys know something about Thursday's call. So remember, a week from Thursday, I'm heading to North Carolina for a wedding, so there'll be no call a week from Thursday. However, tomorrow I'm having my fourth COVID vaccination, and I figure if I'm going to this wedding, I'm going to be on these airplanes, all that. We decide we're going ahead and get our fourth dose. If it's like the other 3 doses I've had, Thursday, I'm going to have about as much energy as a slug, but I'm still going to be on the call, but I might not be my usual energetic self, and I might be relying on you guys to kind of run the conversation a bit more. But that's what's going to be happening for me. So this Thursday is still on. Next Thursday, no call. Okay, questions about anything we've covered today? Thoughts before we go?
That was good. Thank you.
All righty.
Okay. Good conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, thanks everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Wow.